On a bitter March night in 1979, the freight trains along Chicago's riverfront groaned like wounded steel animals, their echoes rolling through the lower tunnels that most residents never knew existed. Beneath the rumble of the elevated tracks and the neon haze of Clark Street, the sub-level maintenance corridors, built during Prohibition and forgotten by the city, breathed with a cold that felt older than Chicago itself. Marcus Dwyer, the midnight janitor for the old Merchandise Mart annex, pushed his mop bucket along the concrete passage with the resigned rhythm of a man who had worked 30 years in shadows no one cared to light. He paused, as he always did, at the rusted utility grate beside Pump Station 3B, not because anything interesting had ever happened there, but because the grate had been sinking more each winter, sagging under its own neglect. Tonight, though, something was off in a way he couldn't name. The air felt tighter, less like the usual damp exhalation of machinery and more like the held breath of a room waiting for someone to enter. Marcus leaned down, listening, not sure what he hoped to hear, but the normal hum of the water pumps carried a faint, foreign undertone. A pulse, soft, mechanical, too regular to be a leak, too smooth to be a loose casing. He frowned and lifted the grate a few inches. A draft of warmer air rose from below, wrong again, because the pump chamber was always colder, never warmer. The city never heated anything down here. The light from his flashlight slid over the pipes, the valves, the old brick, and then caught something that froze his breath. A small metallic box, no bigger than a lunch pail, strapped to the intake pipe with clamps that were spotless, too clean for a station that corroded everything it touched. Marcus pulled the grate higher, lowering his face closer. The device wasn't part of the pump system. He'd cleaned these tunnels long enough to know what belonged and what didn't. This didn't. The casing was smooth, brushed steel, no city seal, no manufacturer stamp, no bolt marks, no wires exposed. It looked sealed in a way that felt intentional, like someone wanted it to survive anything the tunnel threw at it. Then he saw the faintest blinking dot inside a thin slit on the casing. Not a light, not exactly. More like a reflection pulsing in measured intervals. 1, 2, pause. 1. Marcus's scalp prickled. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't a sensor. It was signaling. He scanned the ceiling automatically, though he didn't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe the way a man in an empty forest still looks for eyes watching him. For the first time in years, the tunnel felt inhabited. He reached for the steel box, but stopped when he noticed something else. Gouges on the pipe beneath it, not accidental. A 5-pointed star, not American. Marcus stepped back, heart hammering loud enough to drown out the pumps. The blinking inside the device accelerated only slightly, but enough for him to feel it was responding to something, to him. He lowered the grate slowly, backing away without taking his eyes off the pipe. He didn't know what the box was, who put it there, or what the star meant. But he knew one thing, with absolute, bone-deep certainty. Whatever that device was, it shouldn't exist in a forgotten tunnel beneath Chicago, and someone had put it there recently, someone who expected it to stay hidden. Marcus didn't sleep when he got home, not because he tried and failed. He sat at his tiny kitchen table on North Park Avenue, staring at his hands, as if the smell of the tunnel still clung to them. The blinking reflection inside that steel box kept repeating behind his eyelids like a phantom heartbeat. He had seen broken pipes, burst valves, even sabotage from competitors trying to ruin city contracts. But nothing, not in 30 years of crawling under Chicago, had ever looked that deliberate, that foreign. By morning, the city above seemed to move with the same rhythm as the blinking pulse, each traffic light clicking in patterns that felt too coincidental. Marcus shook the thought away. Tunnel work had a way of turning a man superstitious. Still, something about the device gnawed at him, like a wrong note trapped in a familiar song. When he returned to the mart for his next shift, the air in the lower corridor felt subtly rearranged. He unlocked the maintenance door and found footprints in the dust, fresh ones leading toward Pump Station 3B. No one else had clearance down here at night. He followed the tracks cautiously, each step echoing louder than it should. But when he reached the grate, the first shock hit him. The bolts had been loosened. Recently, the second shock came when he lifted the grate a few inches. The metallic box was gone. Not removed by the city, he would have seen tools, scratches, debris. They knew how to enter without noise, extract without damage, vanish without trace. But something was left behind. A sliver of paper wedged between the pipe and the wall. Marcus reached down with 2 fingers and pulled it out, a transit ticket. But not from Chicago's CTA. He held it closer. The printing was Cyrillic, Moscow Metro, punched 3 times in a pattern he recognized immediately, 1 to 2. The pulse. Marcus felt the world narrow around him. Why would a Russian transit ticket be jammed into the pump housing in a forgotten tunnel under Chicago? Why would it echo the pattern from the device? Why would the device vanish the night after he saw it? Because someone knew he had found it. He pocketed the ticket and backed away, every instinct urging him to leave the tunnel. He was halfway down the corridor when he noticed a man standing at the far end, motionless, silhouette backlit by a flickering bulb. Not a co-worker. Wrong posture, wrong uniform, wrong everything. Marcus blinked, and the man stepped into a side passage without a sound. Was he watching the tunnel? Watching Marcus? Or watching the empty space where the device had been? His pulse hammered as he emerged topside, gulping the cold night air. He needed to tell someone. But who? The city? They'd laugh. The police? They'd tell him to go home. The newspapers? They'd assume he was drunk. He reached the street corner before realizing his hands were shaking. In his pocket, the Moscow Metro ticket scratched against his knuckles like a whispered warning. Whatever that device was, it hadn't been planted for Chicago. It had been planted for someone much farther away, and Marcus had stepped into the middle of something big enough to swallow him whole. Marcus rode the Brown Line home that night, but he spent the entire ride scanning the reflections in the train windows instead of the skyline. Every face looked too calm. Every briefcase looked too heavy. The Moscow ticket in his pocket felt radioactive. By the time he reached his stop, he had convinced himself of 2 possibilities. Either he was imagining all of it, or someone else knew he wasn't. That question answered itself the moment he reached his apartment door. A single sheet of paper lay on the floor, slid under the door, in the neat, deliberate way utility bills never were. No envelope, no handwriting. Just a printed phrase in blocky, machine-cut letters. Do not return to the tunnel. Marcus stared at it, heart stalling. No signature, no threat, nothing overt, but it didn't need to be. Whoever left it knew where he lived, knew he had access to the tunnels, knew he'd be considering going back. He dropped the paper on the table and paced the kitchen. A man could ignore a strange box in a tunnel. A man could even ignore a foreign subway ticket. But a message slipped under his own door? That crossed a line. He picked up the phone, dialed the non-emergency police line, then hung up before the call connected. What would he even say? Hi, I found a blinking metal box underground that shouldn't exist. A Russian ticket. And a shadow broke into the tunnel. To retrieve it, they'd send him to a doctor, not a detective. Instead, he reached for the second number, pinned to his fridge, a federal tip line he'd noted weeks earlier when the news reported stolen industrial schematics somewhere on the Lake Michigan coastline. He dialed. This time, he let it ring. A woman answered. Not hurried. Not bored. Neutral. Federal Inquiry Desk. He swallowed. I work maintenance under the mart. I found something that might be illegal equipment. What type of equipment? She asked. Something electronic, installed near a pump valve. It's gone now. Did you touch it? No. Did anyone else know you were there? Marcus hesitated. The question was too sharp, too specific, like she wasn't just gathering information, she was sorting him into categories. I don't think so, he said. But someone left me a warning. The line went silent. Then, Mr. Marcus Reed. Mr. Reed, listen carefully. Do not speak to anyone else about this. Do not contact the city, the press, or your co-workers. A field agent will meet you tomorrow. Same hour you found the device. Same location. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. Yes, that place isn't exactly... We're not aiming for subtle. The line cut. No goodbye. No confirmation. Marcus sank into a chair, palms sweating. He stared at the phone as if waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. Outside, the city hummed normally, streetlights blinking their usual rhythm, but he couldn't shake the idea that somewhere beneath the sidewalks, something else was blinking back. A device that wasn't supposed to exist, a network that wasn't supposed to be active. And now the federal government wanted to meet him exactly where it all began. Marcus Reed had been a janitor for 30 years. He had never in his life been summoned underground by the United States government. But tomorrow, he would go, and the tunnels would finally stop keeping their secrets. Marcus returned to the mart before dawn. The city still half asleep and dusted with lakefront fog that curled around the loading docks like something alive. He expected to feel watched. But the eeriness came from something stranger, the silence. Chicago never slept this deeply. Even the hum of the elevated tracks overhead sounded muted, as if the city were holding its breath. He flashed his ID at the security guard, who barely looked up. Normalcy, however thin, was a comfort he could grab onto. Marcus slipped into the service elevator, descended past the mechanical floors, and stepped into the half-lit maintenance corridor. A single figure waited at the far end, a man in a dark jacket, hands in pockets, posture relaxed but too balanced, too refined to belong to anyone from city operations. The man didn't offer a handshake. Mr. Reed? He asked quietly. Marcus nodded. Agent Willis. No badge shown, but the tone carried enough authority to make one unnecessary. They moved down the narrow corridor, their footsteps echoing in a rhythm that felt almost surveilled. The further they went, the colder the air became. Not from temperature, but from a sensation Marcus couldn't name, like descending into someone else's territory. Show me where you found it, Willis said. Marcus led him through the chain-link gate, past the water meters, to the stairwell, descending into the oldest section of the tunnel system brickwork, dating back to the city's Prohibition years. Down here the walls sweated, and the pipes throbbed with distant machinery. Marcus had walked these tunnels thousands of times, yet today they felt unfamiliar, as though someone had rearranged the shadows. When they reached the junction, Marcus pointed. It was right there, by the valve housing. Willis crouched, ran a gloved finger along the metal. Nothing visible. Then he pulled out a small flashlight, not standard, not white light, but a narrow blue beam. When it swept the valve, tiny scratches shimmered on the surface, forming geometric lines, so faint Marcus never would have noticed them. Routing marks? Willis murmured. Old-world tradecraft. Someone mapped signal direction by hand. Marcus frowned. Willis didn't answer immediately. He scanned the ground. the ceiling, even the bolts in the wall. Then he looked at Marcus with an expression that wasn't suspicion, but wasn't trust either. You didn't move anything? Take anything? Touch the mountings? I told you I didn't touch anything. Willis nodded once. But the gesture felt like it carried consequences. They continued deeper, stepping over cables and old sandbags until they reached the pump alcove. That was when Marcus spotted something new, something that hadn't been there yesterday. A coin, a simple quarter, lying on the ground, perfectly centered in the alcove's entrance. Willis stiffened. It's just a coin. No, it's a marker. Marcus looked closer. The quarter wasn't old or dirty like everything else down here. It gleamed, recently placed, too recently, a signal. Willis knelt, studying the coin's orientation. This is directional placement. A warning token. Someone was here after the device was removed. Marcus swallowed. Warning who? Willis stood slowly. Not you, he said quietly. A faint metallic clink echoed from somewhere down the tunnel, soft, distant, impossible to place. Willis's hand moved toward the inside of his jacket, not fully drawing a weapon. Just resting there, as though the air itself required caution. Then, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. Willis exhaled through his nose. They're testing the grid, he said. Who? Marcus whispered. Willis turned to him, voice low, grim. The same people who built the device you found. And if they know you're involved now, Mr. Reed, we're no longer just dealing with a piece of equipment. The tunnel hummed with a vibration Marcus had never heard before. Low, resonant, almost electrical. Willis finished. We're dealing with a network, and somewhere in the dark, as if answering, they followed the hum. Not because it was loud, it wasn't, but because it pulsed with an unnatural consistency, like a heartbeat operating beneath the city's skin. Willis motioned Marcus to keep behind him as they stepped deeper into the auxiliary tunnel. The air felt heavier here, thick with dust that had not been disturbed in years, yet the footprints they found were fresh. 3 sets, 1 heavy, 2 light, all recent. Willis crouched, tracing a fingertip along the impressions. They're moving equipment, he said quietly. Marcus stared at the tracks. Down here, why not just meet somewhere? An alley? A warehouse? Willis straightened. Because Chicago tunnels swallow sound. No prying eyes. This is a perfect courier corridor, built decades before the agencies realized it could be exploited. A perfect courier corridor. The phrase landed in Marcus's chest with a weight he didn't know how to name. They rounded the next bend, and the hum stopped. Just stopped. As if someone had flipped a switch the moment they entered range. Willis froze. Raised a hand. Marcus stopped breathing. Silence pressed in from every angle. Even the water pipes seemed to still. Willis edged toward the wall, scanning for movement. Then, without warning, he tapped Marcus's arm and pointed a few feet ahead. A small metal box sat on the concrete. No wires, no labels, no visible power source. It was about the size of a lunch pail, wedged neatly between 2 support beams. Marcus whispered, Is that another device? Willis's jaw tightened. No. That's a relay node. A what? A repeater. Used for daisy chaining short-range signals. Someone built an entire chain down here. Why would they hide it in a tunnel like this? Willis stepped closer, but not too close. He circled slowly, analyzing it with a level of caution that suggested one wrong touch could mean the end of the conversation. Because surface-level comms were compromised decades ago, he said. But these tunnels, this grid, never made it into federal counterintelligence maps. Someone found a blind spot. Marcus stared at the node. Nothing about it looked Soviet. Nothing military. Nothing exotic, just a dull, grey box, ordinary to the point of invisibility, and that's what terrified him. Willis leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing. This build technique, it's old. Older than anything we've seen since the early 72nds. Whoever did this has been working for years. Marcus felt a chill bloom across his shoulders. Years? Down here? How? Why wouldn't anyone notice? Willis didn't answer, because the real question wasn't why no one noticed. It was how many people had helped without knowing. A faint drip echoed overhead, and Marcus flinched. Willis pressed a finger to his lips. They listened. Something shifted somewhere in the tunnel. Subtle, soft, like fabric brushing brick. Willis reached into his jacket for a slim, pencil-like scanner. He powered it on, letting a small display pulse green, then yellow, then red. Willis muttered under his breath. Marcus gripped the wall. Willis exhaled slowly. It means we're not alone. Before Marcus could respond, a shadow flickered near the far end of the tunnel, fast, deliberate. Willis shoved him behind a support beam. Someone was closing in, not running, just moving with the confidence of someone who knew the tunnels better than anyone else alive. Willis whispered, "Whoever that is, they're returning to check their relay." Marcus's heart hammered. Willis's voice dropped to a razor-thin whisper. "We let them get close enough to see whether they're courier, watcher, or handler. And whatever you do," he steadied his stance, one hand hovering near his concealed weapon. "Don't speak unless I tell you to." The shadow stretched longer on the tunnel wall. Steady, measured, unhurried. Someone was coming to claim the device, and the tunnel grew smaller by the second. The footsteps stopped. Not abruptly, worse than that. They slowed with intent, like the person approaching had sensed, not heard, not seen, but felt that the tunnel ahead was no longer empty. Willis tensed, shifting his weight just enough to angle Marcus farther behind the steel column. Marcus could feel the vibrations through the floor now, faint, rhythmic, betraying a confidence that didn't belong to maintenance crews or lost wanderers. A silhouette emerged around the bend, tall, hooded, moving with the exact posture of someone carrying nothing visible, but everything hidden. The stranger paused at the relay node, crouched, and placed a gloved hand on its casing, not inspecting it, not repairing it, listening to it, as if expecting the device to confess something. Willis leaned in, whispering so quietly, Marcus barely caught it. "Watch his left hand. It's not 12er." Marcus didn't understand until the stranger lifted it, revealing not a weapon, but a small strip of metallic foil, no longer than a matchstick. The stranger passed it over the relay in a slow arc. The foil shimmered faintly, responding to invisible pulses, a passive frequency test. Marcus felt a drop of cold sweat slide down his spine. Willis's voice was a breath against his ear. "Courier-level skill. Maybe watcher. Not handler." "How do you know?" Marcus mouthed. "He's alone." "What dirt?" And then the stranger spoke. Not aloud, not fully, just a short exhale of Russian under his breath, a sound more like a confirmation than a thought. Marcus's pulse spiked. Willis stiffened, and Marcus watched his jaw clench with the recognition of someone who understood the language and the implications. The stranger straightened, scanned the tunnel around him, and reached into his coat. Willis's hand shot forward, locking Marcus's wrist to keep him from running. "Stay still," he warned silently. The stranger pulled out a folded paper map, a map of the Chicago tunnel grid, creased, worn, annotated with red pencil markings, lines connecting nodes, loops, exits, arrows, times. Marcus swallowed. This wasn't one relay. This was Station 12 of something far larger. The stranger tapped the relay node twice. Soft, quick, then withdrew a second item from his coat, a small metal capsule. He unscrewed it, revealing a thin roll of paper inside, a micro-coded drop, a fresh instruction set. He slid it into a compartment beneath the node's housing. Willis exhaled sharply through his nose. "He just updated the chain," Marcus whispered back. "Updated it for who?" Willis didn't answer, because the real question wasn't who, it was how many. The stranger stepped back, aligning the relay with something down tunnel, some signal they couldn't hear. Willis stiffened. This time, the stranger pulled a gun, a short-barreled Makarov, not pointed at them, pointed at the relay. Marcus's breath hitched. "He's wiping it," Willis whispered, resetting the node in case it was triggered. With one precise shot, the stranger disabled the relay's outer shell, destroying whatever signature it may have leaked earlier. Sparks hissed. The tunnel lit in a brief flash of orange. The shot echoed like a cannon blast in the confined space. Marcus instinctively ducked. The stranger holstered the pistol and turned, directly toward their hiding place. His head tilted, not curious, alert. He took a single step forward. Willis moved silently, lowering himself just enough to brace. If the stranger reached the beam, if he saw even a fraction of Marcus's jacket, there would be no diplomacy, no warning, no negotiation. A soft rumble echoed from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. The stranger's head snapped toward the sound, away from them. Another noise followed. The groan of an old ventilation grate shifting, metal scraping metal. The stranger hesitated, recalculating. Then he disappeared into the dark as quickly as he'd come, bootsteps fading into the echoing veins of the city below. Marcus exhaled shakily. Willis didn't move, didn't relax. He waited until the footsteps vanished completely before speaking. He wasn't checking the device, Willis said softly. He was checking whether someone else had already found it. "To the sire." Marcus stared at him. "So, what does that make us?" Willis's gaze drifted down the tunnel the stranger had taken, and for the first time that night, Marcus saw something close to dread in his eyes. "It makes us the people he's going to come back for." They didn't run at first. Running made noise. Noise carried. And if the courier had left a spotter, or if the network monitored tunnel acoustics, they would be exposed before reaching daylight. Willis kept a hand anchored on Marcus's sleeve, guiding him step by measured step through the dark, like a surgeon navigating arteries he'd memorized years ago. Halfway up the access incline, Marcus finally whispered, "We're going to the entrance." "Right?" "No," Willis said. "A blaze." He pointed instead toward a rusted maintenance panel half concealed behind old conduit. The hinges had fused decades earlier, but Willis wedged his flashlight beneath the lip and pried with controlled force until the panel groaned open. Behind it sat a narrow crawl space, thick with dust and old wiring. "Tunnel 6 will be watched now," Willis said. "They'll assume whoever triggered the relay is still in play." Marcus crawled in after him, the stale air sticking to his throat. The cramped passage scraped their shoulders as they moved, forcing them to advance slowly, painfully aware of how exposed they'd be if anyone checked this auxiliary channel. "How do you know all this?" Marcus whispered. Willis didn't answer for several seconds. "When you work long enough in this city," he finally said, "you learn who built the tunnels and who hid things inside them." The silence around them thickened, not dangerous, just heavy with everything Marcus didn't yet know. They emerged into an abandoned switching chamber, larger, colder, the ceiling high enough to swallow sound. A metal stairwell spiraled upward toward a faint rectangle of yellow light. The hum of the active train line pulsed somewhere overhead. Willis listened first, hand raised. No footsteps, no voices, only the distant churn of urban machinery, unaware of the Cold War, beating beneath it. "Now," Willis said, and they climbed. At the top, they pushed open a grate and entered a forgotten storage alcove adjacent to the main platform. Commuters on the platform had no idea 2 men had just surfaced from a clandestine world inches beneath them. Marcus could hear laughter, the clatter of turnstiles, the hiss of brakes, ordinary life smothering extraordinary danger. Willis checked his watch. "They'll sweep the tunnel in under an hour. Their watchers will assume local interference." Marcus blinked. "Taken." Willis tapped his coat. Marcus hadn't noticed the bulge earlier, the slight rigid shape inside the inner pocket. "We couldn't leave the capsule," Willis said. "It held their next instruction set. You saw that micro-roll, but doesn't that mean they'll know someone intercepted it?" "Oh, they'll know," Willis replied softly. "The question is who they'll blame and what that forces them to reveal next." Marcus stared at him, finally seeing, in full, the calm calculation behind the janitor's mannerisms, the way he scanned corners, the subtle instincts that didn't belong to a man who just cleaned floors. "You're not a janitor," Marcus said. Willis smiled faintly. "I maintain things. Just not the things people think." "Oko." Before Marcus could speak again, 2 men stepped from the shadowed far end of the platform, not rushing, not hostile, simply appearing at the exact moment the conversation needed them. Plain clothes, no insignia. Eyes trained on Willis first, then Marcus. Willis gave a small nod. Not surprised, expecting them. "Agents," he murmured. "You're early," one agent replied. "The signal you tripped sped up the clock." Marcus felt heat crawl up his throat. "What happens now?" The agent glanced at Willis. "Now, we seal the tunnels, we trace the network above ground, and we let Moscow draw all the wrong conclusions about why the relay went dark." Marcus exhaled shakily. "And the courier?" Willis answered with a quiet finality. "He'll go to ground. That's what they do when they think they're compromised. And when he does, he'll lead us to the rest of them." The agents motioned for Willis to follow. Marcus hesitated. "What about me?" he asked, voice unsteady. Willis placed a hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding, almost fatherly. "You did exactly what you should have done," he said. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice to something only Marcus could hear. "And sometimes, kid, that's the move that wins the whole game." They stepped onto the platform, disappearing into the city's motion. A train arrived, doors sliding open with an ordinary chime. No headlines would mention what had happened tonight. No commuters would learn how close their city came to hosting an active Soviet communication lattice beneath their feet. Chicago would wake up none the wiser. But far away, across an ocean, a relay node had gone dark, and somewhere in Moscow, someone would be forced to make a mistake. The kind of mistake that only happens when America stays absolutely silent.